it's funny, we have to tap into the feminine to reclaim the masculine. I really am a big believer that there is a sequence to all things here because we are energy. There is a sequence, and that sequence is feminine first, then masculine. So we go within, we receive, we tune in, we become quiet. This is a whole art to doing this. And then once we've received, then we have the instructions, then we have the vision to then go do and then actualize and materialize.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, where you can find a large selection of Om and yoga clothing, spiritual jewelry, and unique fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now here's your host, Ashton Szabo.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Savannah Podcast. We've got a great show in store for today, and it's on a topic that's quite near and dear to my heart, and that's the sacred masculine. Now, the masculine has been perverted through the centuries. Often its dark underbelly has been glorified or promoted. And in particular, in my lifetime, I've noticed a huge backlash against the masculine because of that. But what we're going to talk about today is how that really is the dark side of the masculine and not the true masculine, and how we need a rebirth of the sacred masculine, in particular in our modern Western culture. So here to talk with us today is my friend and fellow podcaster, Wesley Parrish. He's a clarity junkie, spiritual warrior, and meditation guide, and you can find his podcast on iTunes called the Obsidian Blade Podcast. Really happy to have him on the show. Wes, welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So I want to dive into the topic, but I want to give our listeners an opportunity to get to know you a little first. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your story and your life and the work that you do with your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So it all began probably 27 years ago when I was 18, and with a book that was handed to me by my mother, which was called Tales of Power by Carlos Castaneda. And that very much lit up the side of me that decided, yeah, what do you want to do for a living? Well, I want to be a wizard. So I have since then, dived deeper into Toltec wisdom, basic kind of Western experiences of shamanism. And that then segued me into Course in Miracles and the universal aspects of Buddhism. So all things to me that describe what I call innate wisdom and stuff that's non-dogmatic, because I believe that the lineage that we all truly belong to is the one of the human being, and that the age that we're living in is an act of rediscovery of what that lineage is. So again, when we have a practice, we begin to create space in our lives to receive this innate wisdom and separate ourselves from the agendas of multiple cultural ideas of what we are and what we can do and what our possibilities are. And here in the West, we have such a challenge because everything is very commercialized. And so there's always a payment gateway of some sort to get to be just who you really are. Or there's this agenda of, overselling happiness or who knows? The list goes on. And that's part of our challenge in the West is to discern all these different things that we're being bombarded with and just get back to what we can be if we enter back into the silence. So that's a little bit about what my podcast tackles is, the tagline is cut that out. And getting back to a mental clarity and, our gift of liberation that we can give to ourselves.
Well, I think part of the challenge too, especially in North America and the United States, is that we're a melting pot of cultures. So, growing up in other places in the world, it was something that I experienced in a lot of my travels where, people are growing up embedded in a culture that has maps for some pretty crucial stages in our human lives. When we've kind of come into this melting pot of the United States where a lot of people's cultures haven't been held on to, and we don't really have a collective idea of, positive qualities of the masculine and the feminine, and how we have rituals. We don't really have rituals, or our rituals, as you said, are very commercialized, and they're not really about personal transformation. So it becomes very difficult for us to really figure out how to navigate some of the more difficult aspects of life, which is why, we want to talk about the sacred masculine and a reawakening of these ideas, but also clarifying the difference between what is typically thought of as the masculine, which is that kind of, womanizing, chauvinistic, 50s caricature of the masculine, which really is the dark underbelly. So I kind of want to start and get your opinion on how do you think we can define the sacred masculine?
Right. Well, I'll just add on to that what you were saying. I had an experience, if anybody's ever gone to, countries like India, where the spiritual infrastructure is right up front, like you were saying, when we travel through our towns and our cities, what are we surrounded by but the agendas of a corporate bottom line? Our temples are the gas stations or the highway billboards. And so for those of us in the West, we have a very, that phrase cognitive dissonance, when we get in touch with spiritual truths, but they're not honored or recognized or neither confirmed nor denied by the powers that be. So that's our little extra challenge that we have going on here. But, back to your question, what is, sacred masculine? How do we rediscover that? That's brilliant, right? We're sitting at a point where we've been given a narrative about what it means to be a man. Like you said, the kind of 50s style of masculinity that seems to be stemming from, in its extreme toxic case, a complete denial of the feminine, that any, touching in of that energy within yourself sets you up for being demonized as less than manly. And, unfortunately, that gets then sent into a category like you get called derogatory names like faggot. And that is hugely damaging to the potential spectrum of what it means to be a man or a sacred masculine figure. This is our time to begin to widen up what that can be, and at the same time have to heal and address what is the origin of this toxicity? Where did it come from? And how can we reach out to other men so that they can begin to relax their aggressiveness and defensiveness around this topic? Because they're feeling threatened. I know that a lot of men feel threatened right now with what's beautiful is that the rise of the feminine is happening. And a lot of traditional male archetype is feeling threatened because we've been limited to the domain of where we get to play. And that's on the outside, right? We live in a culture that celebrates the outside, the physical, the tangible. But the true essence of the feminine is the invisible, the mystery, the inside of things. And so we also have to transform where we're being challenged. It's not that the rise of the feminine is going to take away the outside from the masculine, but quite different.
Well, it's clear that our models and at least the archetypes that we have as part of our culture aren't working. So the question then becomes, well, how do we create models and archetypes that will work with our culture? I mean, if you look across human history, it's always been the poets and the artists that help to create these stories and narratives that help to shape the conscious collective towards these role models and ideas. I mean, where are our role models in our culture now are celebrities, which by no means are healthy role models to have. So the question is, where do we begin in creating healthy models for men so that they can have a clear pathway or a clear path to walk as they discover themselves further?
Yeah, well, very much I like that you brought up celebrity stuff, because where do we get our main stories from? It's movies. And I saw a quote something like there's going to be in the next 2 or 3 years, something like 30 superhero movies, but only 2 of them are based around a female lead. And so what's going on there, right? We have an economy, we're here in the West. That's our main thing that we've developed is commercialism. And so when we focus everything on the bottom dollar and we're trained to think, well, or there's like a fear, like we're going to lose money if we change. Let's stick with the formula. So again, here we're in the West. We are deeply entrenched in a commercial culture, bottom dollar, bottom line. But we have to break through and begin to say, there's actually a whole planet here that's ready for a new narrative. So what else can we say about that?
Well, as a father of a young daughter, I'd say that I'm actually quite encouraged by a lot of the, you mentioned the superhero movies, but like Disney's producing a lot of really amazing stuff. We get a whole side conversation about Disney and other things, but they're producing a lot of movies now and cartoons where you've got these female characters that are very strong and intelligent and courageous. And it's exciting for me as a father of a daughter to see that happening. So she has role models that are much more courageous and out in the world and doing things. And I think that's a really positive thing that's coming out of this side of what we could call a collective feminist movement. But I also think that, I don't want to spend too much time focusing on that because that's also creating a lot of the problems for men right now is that they think, well, that the empowerment of women means my disempowerment, but that's only because the models we have, as you mentioned, have been so reliant upon putting the feminine down. I think there's other models to explore, but they're just not being presented to the average Westerner. I spent a number of years traveling and I'd come back to the United States. And I would put on these things with a good friend of mine, Kyle Shinners, who I also hope to have on the show one day. We'd go out east of San Diego on our friend's property and we'd hold these God gatherings. And there were just men being with men. And we did plenty of feminine things. We'd hold hands. We would share our feelings about stuff, but we'd also, chop wood and build sweat lodges and, do these really powerful concentration exercises. And those are the types of things that I think are very much needed, both models, but also rituals for men to have healthy ways to process their emotions and their feelings and their fears. I feel like a lot of the destructive habits of the masculine, which again, we all have masculine and feminine within us, but these destructive habits come because we don't have a heritage that really teaches us how we can express these things in healthy ways, how we can work through them. And that goes back to one of my original points of we don't really have a coherent system in our culture that helps people deal with this. So people are kind of growing up blind to all this. Maybe they might have a little something from their own family, but we don't have it collectively as a culture. As you mentioned, our cultural identity is commercialism, which is problematic. So how do we as individuals go about creating a new version of the masculine that is both supportive of the feminine, but also supportive of embracing the masculine?
Yeah. Why is the lineage of both, femininity and masculinity lost? That's really interesting. I think there's a very deep collective wound going on here. Some of the information that resonates with me on a long-term human scale is around 12,600 years ago. There's a lot of geological evidence that shows that there was a massive, global catastrophe. Some people even tie that into the story of Atlantis disappearing. So we are much older as a species than we are given credit to. There is very much a disinformation campaign around why the hell are we here on the planet in the first place? So I think I see everything as very interconnected around this. And I can't help but think that in our own lives, when we suffer trauma, we then can sometimes make irrational decisions based off of that trauma to then prevent ourselves from experiencing that effect again. So I can't help but what happened on a collective level, maybe at this time of a global impact of a comet, that perhaps the feminine was more honored and was more in charge of things. And that as a culture, we experienced this trauma and said, you know what, never again. We're now, the masculine's taking over. Because what you see in culture is the rise of agrarian farming, moving away from the hunter-gatherer thing, and an honoring of empires and domination of the feminine. You know, very much when you switch from hunter-gatherer culture, where you're living in the mystery, which is the feminine, and you move to domination of crops and then building this thing called surplus, you're moving into this kind of fear-based, toxic masculine version where the masculine is no longer the, protector of the space, but rather the dominator of the space. So we have, 12,600 years of empires that have completely on a mostly global scale denied the feminine or subjugated the feminine. And we're just coming out of that. So collectively, there's a lot of, in our DNA, a lot of genetic fear that we're having to bust through at this time. And to also, when you go on a yogic path, right, we have to understand that primarily we're energy. So part of this new paradigm of the masculine is to understand, don't freak out, bro, but there's feminine inside of you. But it's just an energy. And just like there's, masculine energy in women. And it's giving ourselves the permission and the freedom, again, to discover a wider bandwidth of what a human being can be. And that we are seeing, actually, especially in the youth right now, a moving away from polarized gender. There's a lot of, you can give it any name you want, but I'll tell you, if you hang out with the youth, they actually don't want to even give it a name. It's just that they're exploring the fact that they have both energies in themselves. And at any given time, you can choose the balance point of that. You can be a man one day and a woman the next day. And people are turning on to that. So
this is a great topic because I think it's also relevant, but it's also one that, I feel passionately about. I think it's one that, a guy in this realm that I really appreciate his work is David Data as well. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the stuff that he does. He's written books like The Way of the Superior Man. I love and appreciate the opportunity of balance. And I also think it is absolutely vitally important that we allow the exploration of gender roles and, where we fit and where individually feels right to us. But I don't think polarity is the problem. I don't think there's a problem with polarity. I think, again, it's that when things get misrepresented or suppressed and they come out in dark ways, that's what we're seeing. I don't think men and women need to be the same. I'm all for men bathing in the masculine and women bathing in the feminine, and vice versa if that's what someone's called to do. But I come from the side where polarity is actually what really charges the universe to move forward. I mean, dealing with a lot of my friends, both women and men, they're having a hard time in relationships because there is no polarity. Everything is just kind of the same. And it's like, well, the guys are much more feminine now, the women are much more masculine. So they get caught in these circles of like, well, the female or the more feminine partner wants to surrender into the feminine more. The masculine partner, doesn't know how to interact with that because they just want to surrender it all. Well, what do you want to do? I don't know, babe. What do you want to do? Well, gee, I don't know. And it just goes back and forth like this instead of embracing the polarity, which, again, I'm totally fine for if it's done in a healthy and supportive way for both sides. And I think that's kind of what you're alluding to in the conversation. Like, hey, can we shift? Can we move? Can we explore the possibility in our culture without ridicule, without being called names or this or that? So that people truly can find like, hey, where's my balance? My balance might not be 50-50. My balance might be 80-20 or 70-30, or maybe it is 50-50. But I think having an opportunity to explore that is utterly vital and that it's done in a healthy way. But I don't know that polarity itself is the issue.
So what you're mentioning is honoring the polarity, and how do we get that back? And I think for a lot of men, tapping into the David data material is a great place to start. And one of the things that we have to take on, it's our responsibility to do this. And right now, when I listen to a lot of women talk about what they're facing and how they need men to step up, it seems that we live in a culture where it keeps falling back on the women to correct men. And right now we're needing to, usher in an age where men feel comfortable correcting men. And that's a weird word too, maybe correcting, but guiding, being there, being present, transforming this dialogue around, rediscovering real masculinity, as well as being okay and how to work with the feminine, both outside of them and within them.
What do you say are, because one of the things that you see culturally across time and is that cultures have myths. They have stories, and we have stories and myths in our culture too. But as we've already discussed, it's like Bad Boys 17. It's not something that is really like transformative. We have a few, and we've got a few that definitely follow the arc of the hero, as Joseph Campbell might put it. But we're really lacking these strong cultural connections to these great myths. I definitely agree that there's a strong need for, and this is within the dynamic of the masculine and feminine, the feminine to be that reminder of the experience of life. For people that identify with the masculine, it's so easy just to sit back as the observer and sort of be critical of everything. The feminine's there to draw the masculine into life. We share a lot of stories on our podcast, and you look at this dynamic between Shiva and Shakti, and you see how a lot of these dynamics are expressed throughout Indian culture, and it's of course changed through time as well. And not that Indian culture is an ideal for us now. The question is, what is ideal for us in this modern day to really find the myths and stories and the archetypes that can, and the support both from men and women, to lead men to a stronger place of connection with themselves, with the world, to take on a role of vision. And again, let me change it to say, we're talking about the masculine, and while we might lean towards saying men at times, this is also everyone has masculine and feminine in them. A woman might have more masculine than feminine in her. A man might have more feminine than masculine. That's all fine. So again, it's not to say that when we're talking these terms, it's one. But I'm just curious of where do we take the responsibility for ourselves in crafting our culture? Because it's easy to kind of blame the past, something that happened before, either thousands of years ago or 20 years ago or last year. Where do we go today to start creating this stuff to help bring forth the new sacred masculine?
Yeah, what a can of worms. When we look at our Western culture, we're dominated again by media. Media is owned by, financial interests. And what are the agendas of those financial interests? And so we are up against a lot. But fortunately, we're also living in an age where we live in an independent media age. And as long as that doesn't get discredited, or say draconian laws come down against it, we do have the potential to bypass the gatekeepers, the cultural gatekeepers, and start to be responsible for forming a new narrative, and also respecting that there's not just one new narrative, there's a trillion new narratives. We've really lost diversity on a scale that we can't even barely remember. We just think diversity means choosing your clothes or what you get to say. The human being as an energetic form has lost a lot of dynamic potential. So again, on a larger, bigger picture, when we start to take responsibility for discovering who we really are and that balance of masculine and feminine within us, there are many new potentials to come into connection with. And like you were using the word earlier, vision, when do we get to have that responsibility of being cultural visionaries and cultural pioneers that are really exciting humanity to discover, its potential, and or, a big kick that I'm on actually right now is that, rediscovering what the heck the earth is, right? Because, as men, how we treat the feminine within us and how we treat women on the outside of us, who are the personification of the feminine, is exactly our relationship to the earth as a whole. Absolutely. And so right now, on a global scale, you can see the answer to the question, how are we doing with that relationship? And I feel that along with the subterfuge of not knowing what the masculine really is, or the subterfuge of, not knowing what the true feminine is, and we're being, kind of a little bit manipulated or put in a kind of fight or flight survival status, that we actually are on the precipice of rediscovering what this earth is beneath our feet and coming back into a real relationship with that. And the only way that we're going to come into a real relationship with the earth is when we begin to respect and honor and protect the feminine. So that's part of the vision that I have going forward, is creating a narrative and creating tools and skill sets where we can come into understanding that relationship with the earth by honoring the feminine within and protecting her on the outside of us. So that's part of our path as men right now, I think, or the masculine.
Well, and so for men that are listening, or again, we can say masculine, but I'm comfortable saying men in this particular case, like, what can they do if they're listening? Okay, look, I feel disconnected from my masculine. I feel disconnected from my feminine. I'm kind of wafting around, which is quite often something I hear from a lot of younger men these days. Like, they just don't really know what they're connected to. What advice can we offer to say, like, hey, here are some steps. Like, we need to do this together, collectively, communally. What steps can we recommend for young men that are kind of just stepping out of, let's say, the high school or even college realm? I've seen a lot of guys kind of throw around sacred masculinity that are like coming out of the club scene or coming out of like, a festival. And it's not, I'll say it kind of lovingly that like it's still very misguided oftentimes of what it actually means and what it is that it's looking to accomplish. So how can we help people on these initial steps of like, okay, we need to start walking this path now. How do we do that?
Yeah. Again, like you're saying, it could be sacred masculine as just another chick magnet technique. And that's just, that's another kind of weird, gross version of the masculine. So how do we begin? How do we rediscover what it is? And, I think that is getting in touch with your inner authority and, being kind to yourself, where I know as a younger man, I got extremely frustrated with the world that was handed to me in the way the system is set up. And that is going to be, over a long time, a very, it's going to be a loss of your energy. It's just going to create a lot of frustration. And so there is, which is also getting in touch with the feminine, going within the technique of listening and the art of receiving. This is something, it's funny, we have to tap into the feminine to reclaim the masculine. I really am a big believer that there is a sequence to all things here because we are energy. There is a sequence. And that sequence is feminine first, then masculine. So we go within, we receive, we tune in, we become quiet. This is a whole art to doing this. And then once we've received, then we have the instructions, then we have the vision to then go do and then actualize and materialize. So this is, again, having a practice and easing up on being frustrated with how it has been and realizing that when you walk out into the world, the men that you're seeing who are still living in the dream, they're still living in the toxicity that was handed to them and indoctrinated into them, realizing that they are your brother. They're just drunk right now. that you're going to have a lot of compassion and a lot of patience and skill to hold that space within you, and then also hold that space for their transformation to happen as well. It's just an easy human thing to do, to persecute another for what we haven't done for ourselves. So I am always living to my best of my abilities, is that, being the change that you seek. So each young man has the ability to realize he's been sold a false bill of goods, and that as he awakens, to go within and redefine what that is for himself. Because again, there is a whole level of diversity, both for masculine and feminine experiences to reconnect with.
Well, there's a story, and I don't know which episode it was. We shared it early on in our podcast with Shiva and Kali, and just to sort of summer it up, because it kind of talks specifically what you're talking to, that there's this demon, and so they need the feminine to defeat it, which is to say that the real challenges to overcome in life are in energy, are in the world. So Kali or Parvati actually drinks this poison that's in Shiva's throat. She becomes Kali, she rages, and she just easily vanquishes this demon. But the problem is that she's so caught up in her dance, in her rage, in the emotions, that she starts to destroy the whole world. And you've got then all these rishis going up to Shiva, being like, hey, we need your help. Kali's now destroying the world. And his first response is to come in as the witness, like, honey, you're being irrational right now and you're destroying the world. And of course, that doesn't work. So, because energy doesn't respond to that. So she keeps on raging. And it's not until he dances with her that she recognizes, oh my gosh, this devastation is happening. I need to stop. But what the story's really drawing to is the importance of being in energy, being in life. As you said, the necessity of the masculine connecting to the feminine. Otherwise, it's just sitting off at a distance all the time. That's the feminine luring the masculine, the witness, into participation. But if you're just participating in the world, it's really easy to get caught up in, well, this person did this thing to me, and I feel this, and I'm entitled to that, and getting caught up in all these, in the swamp, in the jungle of emotions. So we need that perspective that Shiva brings, that insight, that the masculine, as the terms the way that I'm using them, brings in, because you've got the masculine as that perspective, and the feminine as energy itself. So we need the blend of both. Now, that doesn't, again, mean that we need 50% masculine and 50% feminine. Those can shift and change moment to moment, but we will have this idea of like, well, if I'm a more masculine person, I'm going to resonate with the masculine. What is that? How do we find that? And I think that's where ritual, and even creating your own rituals, where I know guys that are going out and they're creating men's circles, where again, there's plenty of feminine stuff that goes on in the way that I'm using that. That is to say, talking about emotions, feeling things, holding hands together as men, things like that. But there's also a lot of things that the masculine responds to, like challenge and really getting other men to be accountable for their actions and the things they say, and all this wonderful dialogue, which can really start with an individual. It doesn't need to be like, okay, well, now we've designated from, a government program that, young boys can start doing this more. Like, it has to start grassroots, where, for people that are listening, go out and just get together with your guys. And it doesn't mean like go out to the club and party and just disconnect from life again, but actually have real, genuine dialogue and conversation, and create rituals that mean something to you as an individual and to you as a collective with these other men. I think it's amazing in our day and age that we allow sort of a cross-pollination of masculine and feminine. That is to say, like getting rid of men's clubs and women's clubs, and allowing that process across. But that being said, I am a complete advocate that women need time with women and men need time with men. It's not about exclusion, but rather an honoring of the fact that men are going to share things when they're in the company of other men that they won't share if there's women around. And same with women. Like, it's great to have us all come together at times, but something that almost every Native culture recognizes is that you need time apart as well. And that, again, builds the polarities, it builds those differences, which then builds attraction back to that other polarity. And you can have those times coming together where things are more balanced and even, but it's necessary for times of specific ritualized separation. And I think that that's kind of what we need as a culture to start creating these on our own so that we can kind of, it can grow and get its own momentum and go forward.
Yeah, and I would say for, each man out there who is rediscovering their masculinity, which includes rediscovering their femininity, is that being okay with the fear that's going to come up and the feelings that don't have any mirroring in mainstream media. Mm-hmm. The process, we're each pioneers right now. There's new territory to be discovered, and you're going to have to become, authentically brave in that rediscovery process. So again, having a tool set that when fear or confusion comes up, do you have that within you to solve it? Or do you have your, spiritual counsel or your men's group to help you get through what's coming up for you? Man, it's interesting to kind of just reflect upon my own life of just, all those times where we have these handed down cultural standards or myths or just, behaviors that we picked up from our parents. And, those are adopted ways of being. And the world is changing right now at a faster and faster rate. And so a lot of things that you once identified with will be cut out of you, whether you like it or not. And who is the being who's going to be ready to move through that and, come out on the other side, being okay with the transformation of anything that no longer serves you. Mm-hmm. And when you were just talking as well, what came up for me is like, what's the main complaint that women have in every relationship? It's basically, he doesn't listen to me. And it's just, isn't it brilliant? It's this core trait that goes on in a lot of situations, or he calls me crazy, or that's the biggest insult that you could give to a woman is like, you're being irrational, or you're on your period, right? Those are the ultimate cut downs of the feminine when the masculine is out of touch with the ability to listen. And so there is a work there to be done for men to understand that, receiving and your woman and listening to your woman is one of the best traits to keeping that relationship thriving. And the fact that, in a culture that honors doing, you go out there and do that. One of the most core masculine traits is actually just being the firm space holder for the feminine to do her collie dance or whatever dance that may be, to hold that space. And it's funny, like you can see that as a passive thing, but no, what if the man just becomes the rock and that's all he has to do? Like, I think our role is not that complicated. I think we just need to be the rock and everything else happens from there. And I'm just happy to do that because I know that once I allow that space for the feminine to dance, I'll be along for the ride. I don't have to do anything actually after that. I just have to hold the space and everything will move forward from there and I'll be thrilled.
Well, and there's something that you said too that very much resonates in my own life and some of my own struggles to say that, the rational mind wants to be able to explain things. And so you can't, and I don't mean this as women, but I mean as the feminine. The feminine isn't rational. The feminine doesn't end. The feminine doesn't get explained and put into a box. You've mentioned a few times that it is the mystery. So what often happens, I know it happens with me, it happens with a lot of men that I know, where you're encountering the feminine, whether that happens to be in the actual body of a woman or not is irrelevant. And it's like, that doesn't make sense. There's something wrong about that. That's crazy. That's this, that's that. And dealing specifically with a feminine person, when that's happening, what they're not asking you to make sense of it or make it so it's rational. I know with like my wife, when she's having a big emotion, she's not asking whether or not it's rational or correct to have that emotion right there, which the sort of perverted masculine wants to come in and like criticize you, like, well, you're wrong for feeling this. Instead, she's just saying, can you let go of your ego in this moment? That wall that you create to literally create in the world, can you let that go for a moment and open up greater into love? It's not about whether or not someone's right or wrong. It's not about whether it's rational or not. It is genuinely just a moment. Can you surrender your ego? That's what Kali does. She comes and chops off your head, chops off the ego, right? Can you surrender into that and just open up greater into love, even if you think rationally that it's wrong or it doesn't make sense or anything else? And that's the greatest invitation of the feminine, to get the masculine out of its preconceived ideas of the way that the world is supposed to be, the way that it's organized, or anything else, and just open up into a greater space of love. So to any men out there or women or otherwise, it's not about in those moments necessarily trying to make sense. I mean, make sense of the weather, right? Like you can't. I mean, you can try to predict the weather. Good luck with that too. I mean, there's all sorts of things, but the weather is a great example of the feminine because it never ends. It never stops. It just shifts and changes, just like the feminine does. So it's like, well, wait a minute. It's sunny. It's supposed to be sunny out right now. Why isn't it sunny? Well, guess what? There's just a storm happening. It doesn't make sense. So you know what? Can you open up to receiving the gifts of the storm right now? And I think that was a huge shift for me in my own understanding with the feminine, of recognizing that it wasn't about making the energy rational, right? Like my early struggles were like, okay, well, I'm concentrating. I've got this great concentration. And now when the feminine comes in, it needs to concentrate too, because anything that's emotion is not stable. It's not fixed. And that's what the masculine is. And we try to project that out onto the world. That's not what it's about. It's about learning to do the dance, whether you're that stable rock, as you mentioned, or dancing with them. But even if you're dancing, can you be stable on the inside to just accept and receive what life is giving you, whether it's a so-called crazy emotion or a loving emotion or a chaotic emotion? Can you open up into it more deeply?
Yeah, I'll just add, the feminine is not a problem to be solved.
Absolutely.
And, very much honoring, and I think you can speak to this more clearly than I can. I know in Hindu, energy understandings, we are living in a feminine universe.
Yes, it's all Shakti.
Yeah. So, as a man and a warrior to be, you're soaking in it. How about you align with it and experience, again, the mystery and being okay with the undefined and realizing that you will be stable throughout all these things, when you come from your center. There's so much to experience. And, I can't, there's all those metaphors right now that we have in culture where we've bridled, the feminine. We've put a yoke on her and we make her aligned with system reports and annual output and GDP. That's all the feminine that we're talking about. And the feminine is not that at all. So removing the yoke from the feminine is needed on a massive cultural level, and then not feeling afraid when what comes out, So there is that warrior strength. How does a warrior, a man, feel totally solid when Kali's wagging her bloody tongue at your face?
Well, I think as this conversation itself kind of demonstrates, like this is a very large topic that could go on for a long time. It's one that I want to continue to explore on my podcast. I know it's something that you weave into a lot of your podcasts. There's something that you had said a moment before that reminded me of a quote that I actually wanted to share, just talking about the expectation that you're going to meet resistance as a young man or woman coming against some of these cultural norms. And it's actually from Albert Einstein. And he said, "Great spirits have always encountered opposition from mediocre minds. The mediocre mind is incapable of understanding the man who refuses to bow blindly to conventional prejudices and chooses instead to express his opinions courageously and honestly. And I think that's a beautiful summation of the necessity of stepping out of these old paradigms that have been toxic, not only for ourselves, but for the world as a whole, to make this shift. And I hope that more men and women are encouraged to do so. Wes, where can we find out more about your podcast and the work that you do?
Yeah, you can go to theobsidianblade.com, and on there, right on the homepage, there'll be links for you to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. And, going into 2017, we'll just be launching a few guided meditations soon, as well as some programs that really help people have a toolkit to handle what we're in store for 2017.
Awesome. Well, let's stay in this dialogue, man. I want to keep raising the bar for men, for the masculine as a whole, and hopefully we can create impact in the world through that, but most importantly, create impact in our own lives. I've appreciated the conversation with you today, Wes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been fantastic, and may we all come into that gentle realignment of our eternal truth in a world that is begging for it.
Absolutely. To all our listeners out there, I hope you've enjoyed our conversation today. I hope you go out and create your own conversations. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you have a very present moment. Namaste. Hey everybody, it's Ashton here with an announcement. We're starting a weekly contest giveaway over at Savannah Spirit. If you'd like to enter into the contest to win one of our weekly prizes, go to savannahspirit.com/contest. If you enjoyed listening to the podcast today, we'd really appreciate it if you went over to iTunes, left us a review, leave us some comments, and share this podcast with anyone who you think might enjoy it. Also want to invite you to go check out Savannah East, which is the name of our blog and also the name of a Facebook group where I interact with guests and our audience. We'll post recent episodes up there as well as interesting articles relating to our guests and or the topics on the shows. And again, thank you so much for listening. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaheast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.